It isn't a groundbreaking observation to say video game movies aren't very good. Some of them may be so bad that they're enjoyable to watch, and some might be good enough that if you see it playing on TV, you wouldn't mind watching it. But no video game movie has yet to hit that undisputed, acceptably good quality that gaming fans have been waiting for. Every now and again, a new video game movie gets announced, and we all get our hopes up that this one's gonna be the one. This one's gonna be different. This movie is gonna be the movie to break through to audiences. I'm not sure why movies based on video games need to be made, or why they even need to succeed, or why I have such a vested interest in video game movies doing well. But I do know that out of all the video game movies that have ever been announced, there was one I had the most hope for. The movie that was based on a game series I have spent well over a decade playing, and a series that I have read dozens of books about. A movie based on my favorite universe, with the potential to involve my favorite characters, and hopefully introduce people to this universe without them having to invest an ungodly amount of time in an MMO. And that movie was... Part 1. How we got here. Imagine it's the year 2006, and you're playing the most predominant and most talked about online game of the day, World of Warcraft. While on a 2-hour flight path to Goldshire, you decide to look at the new blue posts released on the forums. There you read some rumors of a new expansion, but it sounds too crazy to be true. I mean, who in their right mind would make a spell that instantly removes all harmful spell effects and would make you resistant to all harmful spells for 5 seconds, and then give that ability to a class that definitely doesn't deserve it? But there's another post, unrelated to the game's future content. On May 9th, 2006, Blizzard Entertainment announced that they were teaming up with Legendary Pictures to make a movie based on the Warcraft franchise. And with Lord of the Rings taking the world by storm less than 3 years prior, and the MMO going strong, raking in the millions, a story of orcs fighting humans in grand spectacle on the big screen sounds like easy money for both companies. But as announcements tend to go, news about the Warcraft movie disappears until around 2009, when Sam Raimi signs on to be the director. Blizzard is now teaming up with not only Legendary Pictures, but also Warner Brothers Studios, with all of them co-financing the film. With that, Raimi agrees to direct, but only after he finishes filming Spider-Man 4. Then he'll get to work on the Warcraft movie. Wait, Spider-Man 4? Jesus! I just got reminded that time is linear. Well, we all know that history didn't exactly go down like that. Raimi's Spider-Man 3 was met with massive backlash, and he never gets to make his Warcraft film. Instead, in an offhand comment at 2012's Comic-Con, Raimi says he decided to make Oz the Great and Powerful instead of Warcraft, and so the studios went ahead and started looking for another director. In 2013, the announcement came out that indie director Duncan Jones was the new choice to direct the Warcraft movie. This was going to be Jones's first big movie, with an expected budget of $100 million. The movie was scheduled to release in 2015, but it doesn't show up in theaters until around 2016. Along the way, Universal got added to the mix of studios involved with making the movie. So now Warcraft was being co-financed, co-contracted, co-businessed in some way, shape, or form by Blizzard Entertainment, Legendary Pictures, Warner Brothers Studios, and now Universal Studios. When Jones came on board, he was already an invested Warcraft player, and in an interview for the New York Times, Jones talks about his problems with the original script. It was a stale fantasy trope of humans are the good guys, monsters are the bad guys. It just didn't capture in my gut what made Warcraft, the idea of heroes being on both sides. And so the script was rewritten, and we are now so far away from the original idea of capitalizing on the Lord of the Rings fantasy craze and so far away from the year 2006, with 2 additional movie studios now being involved, as well as future financial complications. I feel bad for Duncan Jones. The guy was passionate about the source material, and he didn't want to make a boring movie full of stale tropes, like the orcs being bad and the humans being good. It's also easy to feel bad for Jones, since soon after he started working on Warcraft, his wife was diagnosed with cancer, and before work on the movie finished, his dad would die of cancer. Definitely not a great time in his life, and the fact that he would be dealing with Blizzard fans post-movie release for who knows how long probably wasn't an encouraging thought either. But honestly, it wasn't so much the Blizzard fans being upset with the movie, as much as it was the non-Blizzard fans being upset with it. Warcraft isn't decent. It isn't awful either, though that would honestly be preferable. The sort of distinctive kamikaze train wreck whose spirit you admire. Instead, it comes across as a series of impersonal compromises made by talented people who've resigned themselves to the fact that major movies these days are more brand product than cinema. Warcraft is a failure. With its spastic, borderline incoherent narrative, amateurish acting, and the lack of effective world building, Warcraft feels like a Lord of the Rings wannabe that comes close to matching Peter Jackson's seminal trilogy only in terms of visual impact. The most common complaints of this movie being the human actors, a plot that was hard to get invested in, and a world full of complications that never felt truly explained, leaving the movie as an overall critical failure. The movie could also be considered a financial failure as well, since it made so little money in the US despite making millions over in China. What stands by being the most amazing part of looking back and reading all of this about the movie is just how much of a champ Duncan Jones is for handling the reception of Warcraft how he did. There's a particularly good interview where Jones is happy to talk about the movie and how he did the best he could, and how he's happy with what they were able to make, against a reviewer who was very much not happy with the movie, and who eventually walks away from the interview in a huff. On a side note, that reviewer was sent death threats after the interview, which is something nobody should receive, especially over having an opinion about a movie. I don't feel like I'm breaking new ground here, but I'll say it anyway. Don't send death threats to people. Moving on, a few years later, Jones would comment on what it was like to make Warcraft. He talks about how it was littered with a lot of studio interference, which makes sense. I mean, you got 4 different studios being involved, and with the movie being bought by a Chinese conglomerate during production, there was a lot of studio execs who wanted something from Warcraft. If you don't know how movie making works, and no worries if you don't, I don't really either, but just because Jones was the director, it doesn't mean he had exclusive control over what went into the movie. And this is something I'll get to later, but it is staggeringly clear through interviews and the movie itself that Jones was much more interested in telling the story of the orcs than he was with telling the story of the humans. We'll never know what Jones's original vision for the movie was, but we do know that he had planned to make Warcraft into a trilogy. From tweets as recently as June 21st, 2020, Jones talked about what the future of the series would have been, with the second movie focusing on Thrall growing up as a gladiator and then becoming a shaman or something, and the final movie being the orcs rallying up together and traveling to Kalimdor and establishing Orgrimmar. But Legendary has dropped the idea for a franchise, and who knows if Jones is interested in getting involved with that kind of production ever again. We'll never know the timeline where Warcraft was successful and we got the 2 planned sequels, and so we can only speculate on how they would have turned out. Part 2. The Tale of Two Factions. So we know that the original idea of Warcraft was to make a movie with good guy humans fighting bad guy orcs, and that is basically the original story of Warcraft 1. But a lot of retconning has happened since 1994, and now the orcs aren't all evil. So the writers in 2013 want to make the story more nuanced than just good versus evil. The way the movie tries to achieve this is by having 2 storylines happen at the same time. The story of the orcs, centered around an orc chieftain Durotan, and the story of the humans, focusing on the knight Anduin Lothar. And this movie has a lot of nitpicky crap in it, which I'll get to later, but one of the big reasons the movie doesn't work as well as it should is because these two storylines don't meet up in any meaningful way. There's this one scene around the middle of the movie where Durotan and the Frostwolves try to team up with the humans of Stormwind, but they're all ambushed and are then separated, and Durotan never talks to a human again. Durotan's story is all about wanting his people to find a home to call their own, and also have them stop using the green demon magic. And the humans just want to stop the orcs from invading their land. And like I said, these two narratives just do not affect one another in the movie. A great example of what I'm talking about is the finale of the movie. So Medivh is possessed by a demon, and he's fighting Anduin and Khadgar over in Karazhan, while Durotan is challenging Gul'dan to a fight to the death at the orc encampment, all while the King of Stormwind is marching an army to go fight the orc army. The thing is, neither of these three things directly impact one another. Anduin and Khadgar eventually kill Medivh, but Medivh dying doesn't affect the fight with Gul'dan and Durotan, and it doesn't change the fact that the human army is still going to fight the orc army. There is no impact. Same thing with Durotan dying. What changes in the movie now that Gul'dan has killed Durotan? Nothing. The humans still attack, and Anduin still fights Medivh. And this is supposed to be the big climax. And even here, their plots just don't connect. There's a moment in Avengers Infinity War where the characters all end up meeting with each other and interacting. And while Iron Man and Captain America have separate plots and never interact in that film, they have characters who interact with both of them throughout the movie. And they both fight Thanos, one fight leading into another. Because Iron Man loses his fight, that leads Thanos to going to fight Captain America. They're connected. And when Thanos wins in the end, we see the repercussions of his victory affect both Iron Man's plot and Captain America's. There is never that same sense of connection between the plots in Warcraft, which leads it to feeling like two different movies happening at the same time, instead of two different sides of the same story. I brought it up earlier, but Jones just seems so much more interested in the orcs than the humans. And to be honest, so did all the reviewers of the movie. Even in the tweets Jones sent out, he mentions how the story would have been focused on Thrall and the evolution of the Horde from Warcraft 1 to what we got at the end of Warcraft 3. And there's practically no mention of those scumbag humans and their shitty alliance anywhere. Sorry, my inner Horde is leaking out. Give me a second. Now, I have a little bit of a theory, so turn on your VPN and come dive into the dark web with me for a bit. The lore that we know today, the story of Durotan, of Medivh and Khadgar, that all comes from books that were written years later. The movie Warcraft is based more on the books Rise of the Horde and The Last Guardian than it's based on the old RTS game. There is a lot of story and lore written about Durotan and his friendship with Doomhammer and his opinion about the Horde using Fel magic. And there's a whole book and a whole in-game raid based around Medivh and Khadgar and their time in Karazhan. But there isn't a whole lot written about King Lane of Stormwind. And Anduin Lothar doesn't get a lot of details either until Warcraft 2. This leads to the human-focused characters of the movie feeling less developed than the orcs. There isn't much you can do with Anduin Lothar in Warcraft 1, because all he does is fight orcs and kill Medivh. So the movie tries to add depth to him by giving him a son who looks more like his younger brother, and the movie makes Anduin's sister the Queen of Stormwind. Why? I don't know, but I would guess it was to make Anduin more interesting. And so my theory is that while the Horde has a bunch of interesting internal politics and ethical dilemmas, and an orc-focused movie would be more appealing to Duncan Jones, the movie studios probably didn't see an orc-focused movie doing financially as well as a human-focused one. So they compromised on a 50-50 split between the orcs and humans. I don't think the 50-50 split works. It cuts out a lot of the meat of what makes Durotan's story interesting in order to make room for the human plotline. And the human plot is just a giant mess. This isn't to say that a 50-50 split couldn't work, but with the narrative they try going half and half on, the stories just don't impact and influence each other enough. The idea of focusing on the Horde and Alliance isn't a bad one, but the story of Warcraft 1 just isn't a good enough setting to make that kind of storytelling work. Part 3. Ironforge is in this movie. Warcraft has a pacing problem. After the title card, the movie has us in Ironforge, but this scene lasts only about 2 minutes and then we teleport over to Stormwind. Here, Lothar meets Khadgar, and they have the fastest of introductions, and boom, off to meet the king in Goldshire. Then after a quick conversation with the king, the two goons are sent off to Karazhan to go meet Medivh, and they only stay in Karazhan for a little bit before being literally teleported back to Stormwind. And that's just the first 20 minutes of the human story. The movie has the characters constantly jumping around, and it's difficult to tell where they are, or what is even happening at times. At one point, the movie just cuts to a scene of orcs pillaging a human town, and the Frostwolves are just watching it happen. Why are the Frostwolves a part of the Horde expedition if they're not going to fight the humans? But more importantly, where are these orcs right now? I mean, I can take a guess that it's Westfall, but I can only guess it's Westfall because I've played the video games. The movie never says, but I guess it doesn't matter because that scene just ended and we're off to go do something else. There is a lot of jumping around from place to place with no real sense of geography. In that Duncan Jones interview, that interviewer guy makes the same complaint. The broad strokes of the movie are conveyed, sure. I mean, I get the gist of everything, that the Horde is rampaging through the human land, but it's hard to care about the rampaging when it feels so distant. Like, look at all that pillaging over there, out of focus, in the background. Boy, I really feel bad for this town we haven't seen before, and those humans we haven't met before. I sure hope we see them again. We won't see them again. I'm gonna do another movie comparison real quick. In The Dark Crystal, the two main characters spend a night in a town. There they just hang out and party with some villagers. Shortly afterwards, the antagonists of the movie show up and attack the town and capture the villagers. The audience has enough of an understanding of who those villagers are, and so it means more when the heroes go off to rescue them. Warcraft just has a bunch of nameless, faceless humans captured by nameless, faceless orcs, and our human heroes have to go and rescue them. But at least we get to see Westfall. And I think that's Red Ridge Mountain in that one scene? I'm gonna be real, I have no idea how big this world is, or how long it takes to get from where to where. Warcraft has always been bad about the size of its world, because in the RTSs, the world seems huge, but when you show up in WoW, Elwyn Forest takes like a 10-minute jog to get through. At least the movie is consistent with the inconsistency of the Warcraft world. At one point, the humans sneak up on the orc encampment, and then Duratan says, "Meet me at Black Rock Mountain," and then I get really confused, because the audience has yet to see or hear about Black Rock Mountain until now, and also, just geography-wise, there are way better places for the Frostwolves to meet up with the humans. But the movie just moves so fast and yet so slow. While the locations these characters are in jump around constantly, what they do in these locations is mostly talk. And the talking they do is not very engaging. That leads me to my next point. Part 4. That's not how the story's supposed to go. These characters are boring. Listen, I get it. Translating any story from one medium to another is always going to be a challenging task, and I might get a little anal about changes sometimes whenever they happen, but ultimately I understand, and I am able to accept the fact that you can't fit an entire novel into the 2-hour runtime of a film. There's a lot of background and lore that goes into the Warcraft universe, and it's totally understandable that some of the lore gets cut, changed, or ignored. Hell, I admit stuff from my lore videos all the time, so I can't be too whiny if the Warcraft movie changes some things here and cuts some things there. However, there are some changes that the movie makes that are pretty questionable, mainly the character changes. Let's deal with Anduin first. Ugh, poor Anduin Lothar. They did you dirty. So first off, Anduin is now a young knight instead of a grizzled old war vet, and that's fine. Lothar can still be Lothar regardless of if he's old and bald or young and luscious. The real change to Anduin is his personality. Basically, he's a dick. It also doesn't help that everyone is speaking generic medieval British talk, and Lothar just can't shake his Viking accent. Anyway, throughout the movie, Lothar is just making bad Marvel movie quips as he smugs and spurks his way throughout every conversation and is just a huge asshole to Khadgar for almost no reason. In the games, Lothar is a father figure to Khadgar and Turalyon. He's supposed to be the ideal knight, the guy who puts protecting others first and violence second, and only uses violence as a last resort. And it's jarring to see a character who acts one way in the books and games act totally different in this movie, especially when the way he acts is totally unlikable. Lothar gets it rough, but he's not the only Warcraft 2 general to get a personality change. Orgrim Doomhammer gets changed up too. Instead of being the right-hand man of Blackhand, Doomhammer is now a member of the Frostwolves, which is fine. The real change is that Doomhammer betrays Durotan and his clan, and then tries to stop betraying them. I don't really know what's happening here. This scene gets pretty muddy, which is definitely different than in the books. See, in the books, the Frostwolves go to Azeroth along with the rest of the Horde, but then they're quickly exiled because Durotan doesn't trust Gul'dan, and the Frostwolves just up and leave the southern part of the continent and head to the Alterac Mountains. In the books, Doomhammer betrays Blackhand and meets up with Durotan and Draka to devise a plan to stop Gul'dan. The trio split up and Doomhammer makes his way back to the Horde, but Durotan and Draka are murdered by Gul'dan's assassins. That's a pretty big difference. In one, Doomhammer betrays evil warlock Gul'dan in order to team up with his best friend. And in the other, Doomhammer betrays his best friend to team up with the evil warlock Gul'dan. It's especially weird since the only change from the outcome is that Doomhammer is just now a bad friend. It doesn't seem like a plot point that's worth having a couple scenes dedicated to. Gul'dan just murders Durotan in front of everybody anyway, so I don't get why there needs to be a convoluted betrayal setup to create an excuse for why Draka and the other Frostwolves needed to die. I don't like these character changes, and not entirely because they're different, but because they aren't different in any way that makes the movie better. They just make characters less likable. The notion of changing the story to make it more streamlined makes a lot of sense to me, but in Warcraft, a lot of the lore changes don't make the movie streamlined. Instead, they keep the lore just as confusing and convoluted as it would have been without the changes. Like, how does making Garona a half-human, half-orc with Medivh as her space and time-traveling father make the story more streamlined than her just being half-orc, half-Draenei? How is Khadgar being an apostate of the Kirin Tor less confusing than him just being Medivh's apprentice, like he is in the books? I don't know what's happening here, but whatever is going on with this weird mashup of Alodai and Aegwynn, like, how is anything that happens in Dalaran more straightforward and streamlined than Khadgar just figuring out that Medivh has a demon inside of him while in Karazhan, like he does in the book? Most of the changes added in the movie feel like they just added more confusion to the story than thin out the unnecessary parts. In fairness though, some streamlined changes are good, like Medivh being possessed by Sargeras. Now he's just possessed by some generic demon, and I think that's good. The movie definitely didn't need to bring Titans into the mix. Overall though, the changes to the lore don't feel like they made the movie more understandable, but on some occasions actively made the movie more convoluted. Part 5. Warcraft 1 sucks. I don't know how controversial of a take this is. I mean, any take is possible in the YouTube comments section, but I think Warcraft 1 sucks, from a gameplay perspective and, more importantly, a narrative one. The story of Warcraft 1 is, at its core, very basic. It really is just a bunch of orcs fighting the humans of Stormwind. That's it. All the exciting stuff like dragons, elves, dwarves, death knights, paladins, trolls, ogres, griffin riders, mages, taurens, zombies, demons, old gods, fire deities, robots, and spaceships. It all happens after Warcraft 1. Having the movie be set in one of the least interesting eras of the Warcraft universe limits the options of what stories you can tell that could be engaging. There are really only two stories that get any attention from that era, and they are Durotan getting assassinated and Medivh being killed by Khadgar. And wouldn't you know it, those are the two stories being mashed together in the movie. See, back in 2006, when the original script was being worked on, it made a lot of sense to have the movie be about Warcraft 1, and to keep the movie one-dimensional. Orcs are expensive to make, and I haven't brought this up yet, but the CGI effects in this movie are amazing. Look at those big, sexy orcs, and their big old giant hands that are way bigger than their faces. Where was I? Oh yeah. Orcs are expensive to make, so you could focus the story on a few human characters and have them do most of the dialogue, and then have the humans fight some orcs and call it a day. The Burning Crusade doesn't get released until 2007, and who knows what Blizzard wants to do with the story of World of Warcraft, so it's safer not to risk making a movie involving any characters involved with WoW. Again, all that leads to me seeing how the original pitch of a Warcraft 1 movie made in 2006 would be a good idea. But for a movie 10 years later, Warcraft just has so many characters now, and so many stories, and now the fans who might see the movie won't recognize any of the characters. They might only recognize the locations, which is more likely than not why the movie jumps around to a bunch of different spots as often as it does. It's a bummer that the World of Warcraft movie is really the Warcraft 1 movie, a much less boner-inducing description. It's a shame because the special effects are out of this world, and Duncan Jones had such an obvious passion for the source material that it's almost like if Peter Jackson was asked to direct a Lord of the Rings movie, but instead of the trilogy, he was only allowed to make a movie exclusively about the time period between when the dwarves were chased out of the Lonely Mountain, but before they met Bilbo. Could Warcraft 1 be a good setting for a quality movie? Sure. Could it be a good setting while offering big, grand fantasy battles, include the characters loved by a fan base of millions, reel in new audience members, and set up a movie trilogy with the scope of slightly more campy Lord of the Rings? Well, probably not. Millions of people have not been playing Warcraft 1 for over 10 years, so those characters and plots don't exactly strike the heart of the targeted fanbase as heavily as people might have thought. And that's a shame. Really, that's all I can say about it. It's just a shame. Part 6. Make love, not Warcraft. Man, South Park really did snatch one of the best titles for anything related to Warcraft. That's crazy. I've wanted to cover this movie for a long time, ever since I started the YouTube channel, honestly. Every time I'd start writing a script or notes or anything about the movie, it would just be complaint after complaint, nitpick after nitpick. It wasn't fun to write. I don't see a lot of value in just complaining about little details in a piece of work, because nothing's perfect. And if you spend your entire time plugging up holes in your script, then you aren't spending time writing a script good enough to make people not care about the holes in the first place. I couldn't find a good place to put this, but it's worth pointing out that the acting in the movie, from the non-CGI characters, is just not good. Some of the actors just seem bored with the movie, and others cough up lines in the driest deliveries possible, and the script ain't carrying those line readings either. Okay, so that was the mean comment. I'm going to throw some positive comments at the movie now instead. What the movie does really well is it tackles the language barrier perfectly. In the games, orcs speak Orcish and humans speak human, so it makes sense that they can't understand each other, and I like how the movie handled that. Also, the visual design of the movie is terrific. The armor and weapons are all over the top, and it's just high fantasy to the max, and I love it. Visually speaking, this is one of the best looking movies I've ever seen, even till this day. Not just the CGI, but the colors also pop on the screen, and they aren't like this overwhelming mess. It's just a pretty movie with lots of flashy effects and bright colors, and I'll take that over the muted gray, brown, dark blue flavor that plenty of other movies have today. Warcraft: The Beginning is not perfect. It's fine. Not a whole lot can be done about it at this point, except the movie for what it is. A movie that was pitched in 2006 and then 7 years later given to a passionate director going through some serious struggles in his life, while 4 studios pulled at him like he was being drawn and quartered to make back the $100 million budget being spent on CGI orcs, all based on a story from a DOS game released in 1994. The fact that this movie has any redeeming qualities at all is a movie-making miracle. If you're interested in watching some gorgeous special effects and a bunch of fantasy folks beating each other up, and you got the fast forward button handy for whenever those boring talking screens pop up, you'll know them when you see them. They usually involve those Alliance scumbags, so you're not missing much anyway. Boom! Blasted for the Horde. Then you'll probably have a good enough time with Warcraft. And if you want anything else from the movie, well, maybe you'll see something in it I couldn't. That's all I got. Hopefully this was entertaining, and if it was, do me a big solid and just go follow Duncan Jones on Twitter. And if you liked Warcraft, maybe send him a tweet telling him so, and then check out some of his other movies. The guy tried making a movie about a game series a lot of people love, and you can feel the passion that him and the rest of the team put into the movie. And that's probably where I'm gonna end it. With that, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and take it easy.